We're also looking to establish one in the Northern Territory. And we maintain close relationships with the federal and state government across the board and showcase opportunities to the Australian business community through an active program of events, particularly digital events like this one. In order to meet the emerging industry needs, we have also introduced innovative restructuring and introduced industry chapter chairs so that we can focus very quickly on the emerging bilateral trade opportunities. So we have the agribusiness chapter, the corporate chapter, the digital chapter, the education and skills chapter, the financial services chapter, healthcare chapter, Make in India chapter, renewable energy chapter, SME startups and innovation, women in business, and Shiva Nandiakala, who is also registered today, has been the innovator in women in business, and welcome to you too, Shiva. We have young business leaders, and of course, our inaugural sports chapter today with Preeti Daga. Can I also add that we've also introduced the AIBC Digital Exchange Forum, which positions us as an innovative digital engagement enabler for all our members and to facilitate bilateral trade and business leads and opportunities. And I'd like to take this opportunity to say we want to use this not just for our members, but also for our partners and deepen our engagement with our partners like FICCI, the Federation of India's Chambers of Commerce and Industry, CWI, the Chambers of Industry in India, Invest India, and the Australia-India Chamber of Commerce, the Business Council of Australia, the Export Council of Australia, and others who have joining us in this great partnership. So without further ado, let me hand over to Preeti Daga, our inaugural chair for the Sports Industry Chapter. Over to you, Preeti, and you can see her profile is on the screen for you. Preeti, over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Namaste and good afternoon to everyone in Australia, and a very good morning to those tuning in from India. Thank you for joining us at the virtual launch of AIBC's National Sports Chapter. It is my great pleasure to welcome all our distinguished speakers, members and friends of AIBC for tuning in from all around the world to this inaugural sports webinar. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Senator the Honourable Richard Colbeck, Minister for Sport in Australia, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, lead for CII's Task Force for the Australian Economic Strategy Report, Nick Hockley, Interim CEO for Cricket Australia, Brenton Humphreys, Chief Strategy Officer for the Essendon Football Club, and our sponsor, Dharmendra Patel from the Aussies Group. Welcome, gentlemen, and it has been a pleasure to work with some of you over the last many years. We are, of course, missing former Australian cricketer Melanie Jones, who could not join us today due to some personal matters, but we hope to have her back at the next event. Let me begin by saying how enthralling was the recent cricket test series. I'm sure all of you are giving me a thumbs up right now. As an avid cricket fan, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank both the Indian and the Australian cricket team on an incredible test series. Huge congratulations to the young Indian cricket team on retaining the Border Gavaskar Trophy. And I'm so thrilled that the legend himself, Mr. Sunil Gavaskar, will be joining us shortly. In cricket lingo, it is a great catch, and it is an honor for us to have his company and of that of all our amazing speakers today. The launch of the sports chapter couldn't have been better timed with the backdrop of the recently concluded remarkable summer of cricket, as well as Australia and India recently celebrating January 26th as their national days, which we all know as Australia Day and Republic Day. Our two nations have much in common, including our democracy, values, spirit of enterprise, and love for cricket. As Prime Minister Scott Morrison recently said, the best of friends can be fiercest of enemies or competitors on the sporting field, and we continue to nurture deep people-to-people ties, the thread that binds us together. To quote Prime Minister Modi, we are strong competitors on the field and strong partners off the field, and that is so true. Those statements really sum up the role of sports in this bilateral relationship between our two wonderful countries. It is an area that is an enduring element of a multi-layered relationship. There are more Indians in Australia today than ever before, and the magic of sports just brings us even closer. But beyond cricket, the opportunities for partnerships and collaborations are immense, as identified in the India Economic Strategy to 2035. Indian sports market is projected to be worth $896 million by 2025, growing at an annual rate of 9%. Australia is amongst the top 10 destinations for export of sports goods for India. On the other side, India has aspiration to improve its sports performance at an elite level, with Prime Minister Modi personally invested in improving India's global sporting success. To realize its ambitions, India needs to build a sports ecosystem which encapsulates increased grassroots participation, sports education, technology, and infrastructure. Demands growing for sports management services, training, and governance expertise. Whereas Australia's sporting achievements are underpinned by robust sport administration, world-class research, talent identification, athlete development, sports management, and technology. Australia is therefore well placed to be a significant partner in India's ambitious agenda, and Australian universities are already partnering with India in the areas of sports research and education. With this background, AIBC has established this national sports chapter to strengthen the ties in the sports sector both on and off the field. The key objectives of this chapter is to create a greater awareness on the many opportunities that exist in the sports sector for businesses on both the sides, fostering business-to-business links, aid in policy making for advancement of bilateral trade and investment in this arena, and to further deepen our people-to-people ties through the power of sports. With this, I'd now like to introduce our first speaker, Honourable Richard Colbeck. He's a Liberal Senator for Tasmania and the Minister for Sport and Minister for Senior Australians and Aged Care Services. Prior to entering politics in 2002, Senator Colbeck worked in the construction industry for more than 2 decades, starting as an apprentice and going on to own his own business. He served as an alderman on the Devonport City Council, a director of the Tasmanian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and president of the Devonport Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Richard has served as Minister for Tourism and International Education, Minister assisting the Minister for Trade and Investment, Assistant Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Finance, and twice as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Agriculture. He also held shadow parliamentary secretary roles in the Health, Industry and Innovation, and Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry portfolios. Senator Colbeck is a proud Tasmanian and lives in Devonport with his wife Gayleen, and they have 3 children. Please welcome Senator Colbeck.
Thanks very much, Preeti, and thanks to you and to the Australia-India Business Council and to Jim for the work that you're doing to promote the relationship between our 2 countries. And can I join with you in saying what an absolutely cracking cricket series we've just seen here in our summer of cricket in Australia. Congratulations to the Indian cricket team who survived through terrible injuries and using a number of players to carry off a stunning victory, but an absolutely enthralling series to watch, and for Australia to observe over at Summer of Cricket was just fantastic. And we're very, very appreciative of the Indian cricket team coming here to participate in games in 2020, 50 overs, and of course the fantastic Test match series. We look forward to future contests, and I'm sure that Sunil Gavaskar enjoyed it too, particularly with the final outcome. And it's a real delight to be part of this forum today and participating alongside Sunil, one of the global champions of cricket and one of the heroes of cricket all around the world. Can I say the launch of this particular sports industry chapter in the Australia-India Business Council is an important initiative, I think. The opportunity for genuine connections between our 2 countries, both being sports-loving and sports-mad countries. We know that both our peoples enjoy cricket and sport enormously, and we enjoy competing against each other. We have so much in common. 2 great democracies, and a sporting culture that fits within that. That's extremely strong, and the relationship that goes back such a long way, but continues to build, as we've seen over the recent summer. As a part of today's presentation, I think it's important that I talk about the impact of COVID-19 on sport. We've seen through the operation of the summer of cricket, the issues around actually being able to move around the world, the bubbles that are created to support teams operating and playing sport, not only within our respective nations, but between our nations. And the work that Cricket Australia undertook with the BCCI, and I know Nick Hockley's on the forum with us today, an extraordinary amount of work to make these events successful, particularly in an international sense. But they are, I think, really important, in developing and continuing to build the relationships between our nations, but also important events for our people to be able to observe. I think the contest that creates is very important for the relationship, and also to continue to build the contest between the sport. But logistically, it's been very difficult. I suspect that the impact of COVID-19 will remain with us for a while yet. In fact, this morning I've been talking to many of our Australian sporting organisations to talk them through the logistics of our vaccination rollout, the impact potentially on the Olympics later this year, all things that are very important to us. But the impact of COVID-19 on sport is clearly being felt by all our communities. But at the end of the day, it is events such as sport that are bringing our communities back together, both at a local level, but also at an international level. So the opportunity for us to be able to conduct events like we've seen over the summer are really important. And the role of governments in facilitating that equally important. And the opportunity to welcome the Indian cricket team to Australia, I think, has been a real pickup for the Australian community, and I trust that that's been felt also in India as they've been able to watch that fantastic sporting contest. It actually goes without saying that the relationship between Australia and India is a very important and strong one, and sport has been a very important part of that. Cricket is one of the top 3 most popular sports in this country, and the Boxing Day Test match is one of the most popular sporting events in the country. So the work that's been done across the BCCI and Cricket Australia in making that happen is really important. We as a country invest something in the order of $12 billion a year in sport and sports infrastructure, and this comes from public and private entities. And as has been mentioned in the introductions, the skills that Australia has in events management and technology in relation to sport, I think are some of the things that will provide a very, very strong foundation for us as nations to be able to work together. I saw myself on my first visit to India in about 2015, I think it was, for Australia-India Business Week. The strength of the relationship with respect to sport, there is so much business that's done through a sporting lens. And so there is significant opportunity for us to work together. I saw the real thirst for the development, skills development, athlete identification, all of the things that have been mentioned so far when I was in India. And so the opportunity for us to build our relationship, utilising the skills that Australia has, the needs that India has, but also it can also operate the other way. A continued building of the strength of the relationship using sport as the foundations. There are educational links that are being built already between institutions such as Deakin University in Melbourne and the Indian Premier League, the Rajasthan Royals, as an official sports education partner. So there are many different ways that we can continue to work together. Can I thank you for the initiative to organise the webinar? It's a real example of how in these COVID-affected times we can use this sort of forum to bring people together, to have these conversations that are important to us, and continue to build the relationship between our two countries, both in a sporting sense, but also in a diplomatic sense, and of course in a business sense. So all of those things, I think, work closely together, and I look forward to participating in the rest of the forum today. But congratulations, and it's a real pleasure to be a part of today's event.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that very, very, very good address and enhancing the bilateral relationship. I'd like now to take the opportunity to introduce a very well-known figure in the Australia economic strategy from the Indian perspective, and that's, of course, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa. Now, he has played a real lead role with the Confederation of Indian Industry, which is also a valued partner of AIBC. He's very familiar with Australia's trade and investment aspirations, and more importantly, from the other side in, from India to Australia. We're very, very fortunate today to have Ambassador Anil with such a distinguished background being able to talk to us here in this inaugural sports seminar. Over to you, Ambassador Anil.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. It was inspiring for me to listen to Honourable Richard Colbeck, the Australian Federal Minister for Sport, Aged Care and Senior Australians. It's always a pleasure to come back to an AIBC platform, and this time on sports. And I'm really glad that I've been invited to speak here today. Personally, Jim, I'm delighted that the Australia Economic Strategy Report was released on 18th of November 2020 with a virtual participation of a very large number of stakeholders in the Australia-India relationship. And this report, as you know, has been prepared as a response to Australia's India Economic Strategy Report 2035, which was released in 2018. So during the preparation of this report, we engaged with hundreds of stakeholders in India and Australia across various cities and businesses, think tanks, states, government ministries and universities. And of course, the Australia Economic Strategy Report has identified 12 key areas where there is ongoing collaboration, but also it has looked at the future and highlights opportunities in emerging areas, all of which are emerging and are expected to gain increased relevance in the future in this relationship. And I must say that sports and sports technology is right up there in this list. And that is what I'm going to speak to in the next few minutes. So the Australia Economic Strategy Report has in fact identified Australia as a global giant in the field of sports and sports technology. And that's for the following reasons. Some of them were mentioned by Minister a little while ago. First, Australia has developed state-of-the-art infrastructure across various sports, and that includes things like football, rugby, cricket, tennis, basketball, Formula 21 racing, athletics, and swimming, you name it. Second, the stadiums and the courts developed for each of these sports are also monetized to the optimum through leasing for multidisciplinary sports leagues, entertainment events, corporate conferences, and so on, which does not happen, unfortunately, in India to that extent, of course. And third, Australia is renowned for its sports administration and sports marketing practices. So the agencies overseeing various sports are run by professionals with experience in sports as well as execution in other non-sporting fields. And bodies such as Australian Institute of Sport and Australian Sports Technology Network provide us adequate encouragement and assistance to this sector. Fourthly, the Australian sports marketing companies have developed a very strong expertise in the development of sports and entertainment business solutions, branding for various sports events and sports persons. Fifth is the sports medicine side. So, Sports Medicine Australia, for instance, is responsible for overseeing the health of sports persons across various sports. In India, if you look around, the Australian physiotherapists and trainers have been hired now for a number of years by various IPL cricket teams. Sixthly, the Australian sports tech industry is known for its innovation for advanced products and solutions. And Australian offerings in sports technologies include performance and protective wear, sports equipment, stadium and facility technologies, wearable technologies, sports analytics, and also sports digital solutions. And that then extends to club management and fan engagement. So all these are very much needed in India. And coming to India now, while Australia has a well-developed and established industry, the Indian sports industry is in a nascent stage still, if I may call it that, although witnessing a very, very high growth. And the Indian sports industry was actually 2.7 billion in 2018. And it grew about 16% CAGR from US dollars 1.3 billion if we take the 2013 figure. And although cricket, of course, remains the most popular sport in India, the popularity of several other sports such as badminton, kabaddi, football, and hockey have seen huge increases in the recent past. So establishment of well-equipped sporting academies and also the emergence of domestic leagues here in India have led to a surge in popularity also of other sports. By 2020, sports and camping equipment spending in India, and that is one very good indicator, was estimated at around zero point 0.8 billion US dollars. And besides mainstream sports, there is also an increasing interest now, which one can discern in other sports. That includes marathons and cycling, etc. So the key areas of collaboration for India and Australia could be sports infrastructure, sports administration, sports marketing, sports medicine, sports technology, and sports education. So there's a whole range over there which we can actually collaborate in. And I would say that to begin with, we haven't even engaged, through organization of workshops or training sessions or courses to understand and implement the best practices in these sectors. So that will be a promising start. In recent years, if you look at India, there's been government encouragement in the sports technology sector. For example, we have Spectracom Technologies. Now that has partnered with Microsoft to create the power bat that has artificial intelligence and it's had a chip in it, so provide insights into the batsman's game. Yet another example that I would pick up, and I've mentioned this in the report, is Sports 365, an Indian startup that caters to the sports and fitness sector with its one-stop solution for sporting equipments, and that includes apparel, equipment, and even services such as event planning, consulting, and merchandising services. And that then extends to schools, to clubs, and to colleges, etc. There's another one called Retinsense, an early stage startup that's using biomechanics and sensors to predict the chances of injury to its athletes. So the number of domestic leagues in India across kabaddi, across football, wrestling, boxing, and badminton has gone up quite a bit, and it continues to grow. Australian sports startups with a key focus on audience engagement can collaborate with various sports agencies here to tap into India's growing sports viewership market. And I think that's a big market going forward. I would say that Indian stakeholders can work with their Australian counterparts to develop and to adopt innovative and advanced sports technologies, utilizing the Indian cost-effective manufacturing techniques. And the Indian government has set up its first sports university. Took a long time coming. It's called NSU. That's at Imphal in Manipur. And the foundation stone was laid for the university's 325-acre campus. That happened in 2018. This university will be the first of its kind to promote education in the areas of sports sciences, sports technology, sports management, and sports coaching. And that's another area that I would single out for collaboration between India and Australia, coaching. We know that an MOU has been signed by the National Sports University with the Australian universities of Canberra and Victoria. And India can work with Australia in the establishment of a similar sports university to support the development of diverse sports and to improve access to infrastructure and sports-related specializations for upcoming athletes and students in India, because that's a big, huge number. So this proposition was actually included in the joint statement between the prime ministers of the two countries back in 2015. So the report, which we've been working on and has now been released, recommends that we should have a cohesive action plan to be initiated by the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports in India in correspondence with the relevant Australian universities and institutions for this purpose. And sports collaborations between the NSU and Indian sports universities may also be initiated, in my view, in curricula, in exchange of faculty accreditation of laboratories for sports science research programs for NSU, and also some short duration courses for faculty of NSU at the University of Canberra as well as Victoria. Students in India, I'm sure, will greatly benefit from courses in sports management, sports administration, and sports marketing in collaboration with Australian universities. Victoria University already actually has an ongoing project with the Australian Institute of Sport for a sport and technology business incubator, which allows Australian sports companies to explore commercial opportunities in India. And Australian funds and investors, again, can explore potential opportunities for investment in sport and sports technology sector in India. As the minister mentioned, post-COVID, we've seen a great decline in live sports viewerships and also sporting events because natural resources have been prioritized to critical areas like pharmaceuticals or healthcare or agriculture or education, etc. However, as the world transitions back now to normalcy, sports and sports technology will certainly emerge as a major sector of collaboration between India and Australia. And nothing exemplifies this better, as the minister said, than the recently concluded cricket test series between Australia and India. Let me just stop there, and I'll take some questions if there are later on. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Anil, for that very comprehensive picture of where we are and where we'd like to be in the sporting relationship. I'd like now to take the opportunity to introduce Nick Hockley, the Interim CEO of Cricket Australia. You can see his profile there, a very impressive profile, and he, of course, has a very challenging job ahead of him, given the result of the last test match in Brisbane. So, Nick, I'll hand over to you, and you can share with us your perspective, where you're going and where it's all at. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for that very warm introduction. Thank you, Preeti, and everyone at AIBC for inviting me to join you today and for all your support. Congratulations on the launch of the sports chapter. We very much look forward to working closely with you. I'd like to thank Senator the Honourable Richard Colbeck, Minister for Senior Australians and Aged Care Services and Minister for Sport. And simply this season, cricket would not have taken place without the exceptional support of the Australian government and governments around the country. And Minister, I think you know how instrumental you were in allowing us to India to come safely and play this latest tour. And cricket will be forever grateful for all your support, your ongoing support. So thank you very much. So I was asked by Preeti to talk about the future of India and Australia's sporting relationship. And I think a word that we've heard a few times already today is relationship. And I think sport, and believe very passionately that sport is all about bringing people together, and never has that been more important than at this time, given the global pandemic. So today I'm going to talk briefly about India and Australia's illustrious and long cricketing history. I'm going to talk specifically about the power of cricket in enhancing the India and Australia bilateral relationship. We'll talk about cricket's role in fostering progression, innovation, education. The ambassador has already talked about some great education initiatives. And then finally, some reflections on this current series and what that means for the relationship going forward. So I'm sure it wasn't lost on Ravi Shastri and Ajinkya Rahane and the squad that the first test match between Australia and India actually took place in Brisbane and dates back to the 47-48 series. Don Bradman in the first innings scored 185, and Australia won that first test by an innings and 226 runs and won the series 4-0. So how things have changed. This picture on the screen now is the infamous tied test in Chennai in 1986. And it is a great privilege, and we're enormously grateful to Sunil Gavaskar for coming out to Australia this summer and for his fantastic commentary on the series. Sunil, I think, in that test match scored 90 runs in this innings before being caught by Dean Jones, the late Dean Jones, off the bowling of Ray Bright. Dean and Jones obviously got 210 in that infamous first innings of the tied test. And I think the outpouring, not just in Australia, but in India, of Dean's passing in his beloved India, really is testimony to the affinity and also the affection and the connections that cricket creates between our two countries. So I was fortunate, and probably the most striking example of the power of of cricket in the India-Australia relationships. I mean, having grown up in Birmingham in the UK, played in junior teams with lots of friends and teammates of Indian background, but it was the 2015 Cricket World Cup in Australia and New Zealand, and the game that will stand out for me is when India played South Africa at the MCG. There were 86,876 fans, of which I think 90% were supporting India, and is an indication of the passion and the love of cricket of particularly the Indian diaspora, but also a large proportion of the 150,000 international visitors that came to the 2015 Cricket World Cup were from India. A particularly memorable moment as well was this night at the Adelaide Oval when India took on Pakistan, which at the time was the most televised cricket match in history. And I think for those of us who were there, we will very much remember that one side of the venue, the stadium, was blue, the other side was green, but more so just the really joyous atmosphere. And I think that's the power of World Cups. So sports is very much a microcosm of society. I think it plays a great role in not only bringing people together, but fostering greater cultural understanding. I think in terms of sport has a great role in progression. And earlier this year, we were very fortunate to have the privilege of hosting pretty much the last major event before the pandemic struck, which was the Women's T20 World Cup. And if we think back to the planning for the Women's T20 World Cup in Australia actually started back in 2016 in India at Eden Gardens, when we witnessed the World T20, as it was called then. That day, the West Indies won both the women's and the men's, and it was very clear to us that the afternoon match with the women was not as well attended as the men. So it really spurred us on to give both events equal billing. And Vishal, if I can just ask you to bring up the next image. I think the 86,174 that turned up to watch India play versus Australia in that final. Not only was that the biggest sporting crowd at any sporting event in 2020, but the impact that will have had in terms of gender equality, not in India, changing the attitudes of girls and boys, that we can all have the same opportunities is a great sign of the power of cricket and the power of sport for progression in our society. We've talked a little bit about innovation. So many examples. Company Straightbat in Bangalore that has done great innovation, attaching sensors to the back of bats to analyze bat swing speeds, power hitting, backed by Greg Chappell. Speaking of Bangalore, the National Academy in India, we're very proud to work with the BCCI and joint coaching programs. And then this current season, I think the Minister was very generous in explaining quite the logistical complexities and how much work has gone in behind the scenes, but we can't thank the BCCI enough and the players for their sacrifices. We've had to work more closely with the BCCI than ever before. And I think that, as well as the most incredible series, I think that sets up the relationship well moving forward. International cricket needs each other. And I think we'll always be extremely grateful that during the pandemic, India and their squad, Ravi Shastri, Virat Kohli, Ajinkya Rahane, came and played in Australia. So with that, thank you again to Jim, to Preeti for the opportunity. And Jim, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks very much, Nick. And it was really quite great to hear you link the historical science and bring it between Australia and India and take us into that great spirit of the history of this relationship. So thank you for doing that and having the forward look. And on that note, let's take a slightly different turn to the AFL, the Australian Football League, over to Brenton Humphreys. And he's the Chief Strategy Officer for the Essendon Football Club. And it's probably a good and appropriate time to have a look at a case study in terms of Essendon's India engagement strategy. So I'll ask Brenton now to outline the case study and some of the perspectives and things we can expect in terms of benefits and opportunities. Over to you, Brenton.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for the invitation, Preeti and your colleagues, and hello to everybody here in Australia and over in India. Thank you to all the speakers who have already shared their thoughts. Really interesting comments made throughout, and no doubt there'll be some great time for questions shortly. I guess you're probably asking, some of you might be asking, what on earth are we doing sitting on this webinar listening to someone talk about Australian rules football? And I have to admit, I've asked myself a very similar question along the journey with respect to our India engagement strategy, but I'll take you back a little bit throughout that journey, and I'm sure it will start to make make some sense as to what that looks like from an Essendon Football Club perspective, at least, but more broadly around Australian rules football, and I think sport in general, outside of obviously the sports that we've already touched on, and the likes of cricket in particular, which transcends most things in India, as we all know. We're a long way from that in terms of popularity, of course. We know our place in the pecking order, and that's coming from a very avid cricket fan. So again, congratulations to all of the Indian followers on the call, even through gritted teeth, as frustrating as that was to watch. But it was a sensational series and a great testament to sport and obviously the relationship between our two countries. For us, taking a step back, our India engagement has naturally evolved over probably almost 12 years now. I've been at the club around that time, and so I joined at a time when we're really at the early phases of building a strategy around engaging with the Indian community, and really, to be honest, not sure what that looked like. We're obviously a domestic sport, certainly at the time, 12 years ago, very much a domestic sport. There was no China strategy for the likes of Port Adelaide, and certainly no India strategy yet for the likes of us. And AFL being played overseas was not even being really discussed seriously, bar the odd sort of international trip here or there, more so probably for the enjoyment of those going as opposed to any form of long-term strategy. But for those that may recall back then, our relations, particularly with respect to our international student, the international student community in Australia, of Indian community in Australia, wasn't where it should be. Our relations, went through a challenging period there, and for us sitting here in Melbourne, we thought, well, we have a responsibility here to play in terms of our leadership role within the Australian community to see how we can help. And so what we devised was a program called Global. We looked at what were some of the fundamental challenges here, and there's obviously a range of them, and I won't go into that, but really we thought if we could distill it down into, helping create greater understanding and connection between the Australian community, obviously the Indian international student community, and really using our membership base. At the time was just shy of 50,000, and now it's getting closer to 100,000 members here in Australia of paid members. We thought that's a significant, paid, engaged membership base that we really have a responsibility to better educate, and provide better opportunities to connect and support this community as a really significant community of not just Indian, but obviously the Indian international student market was and still is, very significant within that number, as to how we could better, provide them with a better opportunity and experience of their time in Australia. And so the global program, extremely simple in its form. We realised, well, what's going to create, how are we going to get the attention of these students? We're Australian rules football. They have no idea what we are most of the time, which is fair enough. Cricket's the #1 sport coming from India. Let's go and chat to the team at cricket. It was Cricket Victoria actually that we spoke to at the time, and said, look, we'd really like to find a way to create a community-based program that can help, both the international student and local Australian communities come together and build stronger bridges. And they were grappling with a similar challenge themselves at the time. And so a partnership was born in between Essendon and Cricket Victoria to create the global program. And what it really did was give international students access to games, understanding that financial situations are tight for international students, and us expecting someone to come along and spend their discretionary money on going to a game of football was highly unlikely. So tapping into that leverage and strength of cricket, we got huge numbers of international students along to games of cricket for free, of course, and partnered them up with Essendon members, both at cricket games and then ultimately in the winter to Essendon games. And so there was a series of 5 or 6 games throughout the year, a mixture of cricket and then obviously football in the winter months, which works well, obviously, that we're not competing at the same time, whereby international students would be paired up with members, and they just get that basic experience, but really strong, powerful experience of going to a game of Australian rules football. And what does that mean to the local community, and what team should they go for? Obviously, we told them to go for Essendon, but no, they were given that choice, of course. But just giving them that basic entry and experience into what, for so many people here in Australia, is, if I'm to use the phrase, what is the next sidestep to religion? Well, sport for so many fronts is for so many people, and in particular the eastern side of Australia, it's Australian rules football, as it is for so many people in India, it's cricket. So we brought those two together, and since then that program has been a huge success. We've been thankful to have the support of state governments, private sector, to really enhance and grow that, and mean that we could just raise the bar in terms of the sheer volume of participants that we could invite into that program. As I said, it was a completely free of charge program, but from there it really spawned into then opening up the breadth of not just Essendon, but other clubs, obviously cricket itself, into other community sector groups. Universities came on board, again, then opening up those networks so that people had just a common bond and an understanding and a connection of what that was like. And as I said, for so many people that, stand around the water cooler on a Monday morning in cities like Melbourne, for example, where I am, 8 out of 10 people will be chatting in the winter about what happened at the footy on the weekend. And so for those people that had never experienced that, they suddenly felt like they were included and had an understanding of that. So it was a really simple program, but from humble beginnings, it grew really quickly in the vicinity of over 5,000 students every year after about the 3rd or 4th year. And so our capacity to actually maintain that became more of an issue, but a really good problem to have. So that was really our first sort of formalised foray in terms of a program into the Indian market. So it was a bit of a hybrid of an international approach with a domestic execution. From there, we sort of walked a balancing act of focusing between domestic and international. Again, looking at our sport, it has its challenges to take itself to India for obvious reasons. So we started a lot of our activity domestically and what we could do with the local Indian community in Australia, in Melbourne, and particularly in the northwest of Melbourne, where the Essendon Football Club is based. And it was based up until around 7 years ago in Essendon, is now at Melbourne Airport. So that northwest corridor of Melbourne, which is, depending on which year and which census, how the numbers fall, either the first or second fastest growing residential corridor in Australia. So it's a really heavily growing populated sector of Melbourne, but it has a lot of challenges in terms of needs of services and community infrastructure and activity. So we see that and have seen that since then as a really critical part to play as a domestic part of our strategy in the northwest of Melbourne. So, the things like creating our own Auskick Centre in Craigieburn in the north of Melbourne, that was really pioneering at its time. And from there, it's spawned and grown into its own fully fledged by the Indian community itself in that region, who established their own football team, their own football club. And that's been a fantastic outcome of our strategy in that time, something that we're really proud of, and proud of that local community developing off their own bat, coming from understanding what the sport could be to then actually understanding what the power it could be within their community, and then being fully coordinated from them has been brilliant. From a match point of view, obviously nothing beats the game itself and bringing the game, the highest form for us, the AFL standard, to the community. So having an annual Embracing India round for us has been a huge focus each year. We've done a whole range of initiatives around that week, similar to what, for those that have an awareness of Australian rules football, things like Dreamtime at the G, like the Anzac Day game. Essendon played a really strong part in developing those. And along a similar vein, our Embracing India game, we've looked to put a lot of emphasis and bring a lot of stakeholder partners into helping us develop that. Things like having the basic commentary done in Hindi and Punjabi language, things that for us, as I said, 5 years ago, would never have even thought of, but have been, huge success. And through the power of now watching, through your phone, on computers and alike, on your mobile device, that ability to break through and cut through outside of your traditional TV broadcast and use those channels has been enormous. Another element to our strategy as we've continued to grow outside of that domestic was, as we look to sort of how do we look at that international aspect as being, well, let's look at, in a similar way that we looked at cricket as being, one of the obvious sports to hook into as best as we can and partner up with, was kabaddi, and actually establishing the first Australian kabaddi team. We played a strong part in that from its infancy, and sending that team over to India to compete in the kabaddi championships over there. Some of you may recall seeing a number of ex-AFL players being a part of that, and a big factor was obviously our involvement in promoting that over there and here as well. So that was fantastic to see, and really unique, again, being able to bring, not just obviously take our game to the Indian community, but to also bring a domestic, a similar sport in that sense over in India that isn't necessarily as widely known outside of the country, into our market here and explaining what that's about. Again, just another opportunity to cross those connections and strengthen those relationships. And the AFL International Cup, we've been a strong supporter of that for many, many years, has been another critical element to all of that. So there's a number of a number of activities and a number of layers that we've seen through our India engagement strategy. But fundamentally, it's been around longevity and having that length of strategy and not being too short-sighted and looking for, I guess, quick wins in that. And a big part to play in really helping us achieve that has been the credibility that having people on the ground, both here and in India, properly connected to the community, having our own multicultural officer, Sudeep Chakraborty, who I know is on this webinar at the moment, who we employed from India, who was previously the head of AFL India as our multicultural officer for the last 5 years or so, has been instrumental for us. Getting that breadth of authenticity and advocacy amongst community in India and here, and really educating us to understand how our strategy needs to pivot, as all strategies do, to ensure that there's a sense of genuineness and, as I said, longevity to what we're looking to do. So that's a really quick snapshot of a number of the things that we've been doing over the last, as I say, sort of 10 to 12 years. But for us, it's very much a long-term play that we'll continue to pivot with, continue to look for new partners. A number of the things that have been mentioned previously around, university education partners we're actively engaged with at the moment. Strategic partners, RMIT University here, really interested in looking at how that broader sports model that was spoken about earlier, and that support of the industry in India more broadly, and the role that the likes of, say, an Essendon Football Club could play, as with other clubs and codes. I think there is a huge opportunity there for sure for us to sort of share our support together on that front, absolutely. But that sports diplomacy aspect, there's no hiding and shying away from that, nor should we. I think we absolutely understand each other's common links around our love of sport, and we should absolutely, to the Minister's comments at the start, absolutely see that for what that is, and really lean in and leverage those appropriately and strongly to strengthen our relationships on a whole range of fronts, because we share something that's quite unique, and our love of sport in that sense is really strong and obvious. So I think there's huge opportunities, even for a little domestic code like Australian rules football, to share with a big country like India, and how we might be able to grow and learn together.
Thanks very much, Brenton. That's bringing in the AFL. I know that the City of Springfield is very excited about AFL Women's Stadium, which has been built, and we already had inquiries from Indian women's sports about when that's likely to be available. So thank you for that presentation. I'd like to acknowledge our cricketing legend, Sunil Gavaskar, who has just joined us on the webinar, and we'll be coming to you in a minute, Sunil. But as they say, a word from our sponsor before we do, and that is, of course, Dharmendra Patel from the Aussies Group. And Dharmendra is going to share with us his perspective, and thank you very much for sponsoring this webinar. And over to you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone, for giving us an opportunity to present our company on this platform. Sports develop people-to-people connection. This includes opportunity to inform and influence key demographics who are our emerging leaders. Students are the second largest group of international students studying at the charity university. We are always surrounded by this international students, as this group is the leading trusted company in immigration industry. Aussies Group and I personally believe in sport. We encourage and participate in events conducted by the student bodies at universities. Students pick up the local flavor of the sports, and I see a huge opportunity here for international students becoming a part of clubs at early stage of the Melbourne. In early days in Australia. I really would like to congratulate AIBC in this chapter of sports, which will be the ties between two countries in the long term. Really appreciate for giving us an opportunity to become sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a little bit of noise there, but we got your key message. And now, it's time to ask Preeti to introduce our cricketing legend, Sunil Gavaskar. It's really great to have you here. Thanks so much for coming. And so without further ado, I'll hand over to Preeti.
I think, Jim, you were going to introduce Sunil sir.
Well, let me introduce him then.
Thank you.
Well, what can we say? I mean, he is a legend of our times with 34 test centuries. I remember watching you over the years and even at listening to your commentary at the Brisbane test match that we just had. And it's really great to have inspiring figures like yourself that inspire people, not just with cricket, but beyond cricket. I mean, you're the first person to score 2,000 runs, the first player to have more than 10,000 test runs. And you really, most of us in Australia feel like we know you really well because you're also a very well-known cricketing commentator. And when you look at all the awards that have been presented to you, you know, we fully support that. So Sunil, it's a great privilege that you've been able to join us. It's great that our audience is able to see your profile. And one last thing I'll mention about you is that for 16 years, you used to bat without a hat. And I think that's a remarkable achievement. So over to you, Preeti.
Well, thank you all. And thank you for that introduction. I can continue with your last comment that you made about batting without a helmet. I think it was actually not a big deal at all because there was nothing inside to protect, so didn't need to wear a helmet. I've joined this webinar a little bit late. Would you believe I actually lost my phone? I was looking for my phone for a while. And anyway, so I've been able to join. And what I can say is that a sport is a universal language. It's a language that everybody understands. You know, your national language might be completely different, but sport speaks a language which everybody understands. And therefore, it is easy to interact with people from different countries through sport. I think there's an immediate connection with that happening. That being said, I think most Indians speak reasonably good English, and therefore that's another connection as far as India Australia is concerned. That's what I've been saying whenever I've come to Australia and I've had the opportunity to speak at business, seminars, etc. That's one thing that I keep emphasizing on is that look, there is a common language which is understood, and therefore obviously straight away any initiatives can be looked at without needing translators or interpreters or something like that. So that's I think a huge plus as far as India and Australia are concerned as far as the language is concerned. Sport can build bridges as well. I mean, we all know, and I think that's such an important aspect. And I think over the last few years, with the Indian Premier League, and I speak from a cricketing angle, obviously not knowing much about other sports. What the Indian Premier League has done is it has actually built bridges across cricketing communities. There are Australians, there are South Africans, there are New Zealanders, West Indians. They are all playing with Indian players for different franchises, and therefore getting to know each other that much better. And spending 2 months traveling together, training together, spending the off days together, the days off, and generally getting to know each other better. And what therefore the IPL has done in a huge way is that it has taken away the animosity that was there between players of different countries. Prior to 2008, you would have read there was a lot of nastiness, if I might use that word, nastiness on the cricketing field. Things were said which were totally uncalled for, created bad blood. But what the IPL has done is it's taken their animosity out as players have got to know each other better. And while the intensity has not gone down at all, when you're representing Australia, you're going to be very, very intense. When you're going to represent India, you're going to be absolutely very competitive. That hasn't gone down, but the animosity has gone down, and that's what I mean by sport being able to build bridges. And that happens when you get to know each other better. And clearly, I think, therefore, there is scope for India and Australia to cooperate in various sporting activities. At the moment, if I might say, the traffic is a little bit one way, and for really the understanding to be greater, the traffic has got to be two ways. I say one way because Australia being a very, very good sporting nation, not just in cricket, hockey, but Olympic sports, winning heaps of Olympic medals, winning Davis Cup for tennis, and the slam titles, and in hockey winning the world titles. Cricket being the top team for such a long time. Yes, so we understand that there is a lot to learn from the Australians, and so therefore a lot of Australians coming to India, for as coaches, as trainers, is something that is understandable. But over the last few years, I think India has shown that India is also capable of doing very well in sport, and therefore the reverse, I do believe, needs to happen. That where you have to have a lot of Indians coming down to Australia. Cricket, for example, I mean, India has been the #1 cricketing nation in terms of the World Cup as well as T20s. Australia has not yet won the T20, but when it comes to something like the Big Bash, which I was there just now in Australia, a few days ago, there's no Indian around. There's no Indian around as a coach or an assistant coach or a trainer or anything of the sort. On the other hand, have a look at the IPL franchises. Just about every IPL franchise has got an Australian coach, and then when the Australian coach is appointed, he brings his own colleagues down there. So a lot of Indians who otherwise would have got an opportunity to learn don't get that opportunity. So I think that for anything to succeed, it's got to be two-way. At this particular point of time, it is more one way from Australia. A lot of people coming from Australia, but I think for it to be more successful, I think we need to have a two-way situation. That's the point that I want to make. And once that starts to happen, I'm sure I think then the sky is the limit as far as India-Australia sporting relations is concerned.
Thanks very much. What a great way to introduce Preeti to ask you some questions in terms of one way or two ways. So over to you, Preeti.
Thanks, Jim, and good afternoon, Sunil. So it's an honor to actually chat to you at this forum, and thank you so much for your time for being here. It's truly appreciated. Well, I've got some questions. People registered. Once they knew you were joining us, our registrations went through the roof and the questions have started coming in. So I'm just going to pull out some of those and ask you on behalf of all the attendees that have joined today. So I think starting with the historic win at the Gabba, I think we've heard your commentary across various platforms, but it's always amazing to hear in live. So what did you think of the Indian win? And what would you say to the current the young Indian cricket team?
Well, I remarked at the end of the win that I am over the moon and in orbit. And I can tell you I'm still over the moon and still in orbit with that win. What that win showed was that Indian cricket has got a great bench strength. It's got a very good supply line of talent. Because when you look at and I talk only about the Gabba test at the moment, because Brisbane's supposed to be Australia's fortress as far as cricket is concerned. They hadn't lost it till 1988. So since 1988 till now, this is the first time Australia lost the game at Brisbane. But India didn't have Bumrah, India didn't have Ashwin, India didn't have Jadeja. They had three main bowlers. Mohammad Shami had gone back with an injury. Umesh Yadav had gone back with an injury. So we had, when we entered the Brisbane test, we had a bowling attack which had only 13 wickets in test cricket, compared to Australia, who had 1,033 wickets amongst their four-man bowling attack. So for that bowling attack, that inexperienced bowling attack, new bowling attack, to bowl the way that they did and to get India to that winning situation, just tells you heaps about what the talent is. And then for the young Indians like Shubman Gill, Rishabh Pant to bat Washington Sundar, to bat in the manner that they did, Shardul Thakur again playing only second test, just shows that nobody is indispensable. In cricket, it's not just, it's been over the ages, it's not just now. Throughout the ages, nobody, every time we think, oh, what will happen if so-and-so is not there or so-and-so is not there? But there's always somebody who will come. Maybe the style will be different, maybe the approach will be different, but it'll end up doing the job as efficiently. So it was fantastic to see that. And that actually gives us so much, hope for the future for Indian cricket.
I think we are all in the orbit with you. I'm sure everyone's agreeing with that. Can I just ask, what do you see is the key difference in the time that you played and the current times and how the players are? What has really changed?
I think what has changed is that cricket has become a career option. Earlier on, when we played cricket, it was not a career option. We all went, after playing cricket, we went to a 9 to 6 job. We all had a job to go to. Now, you don't have to have a job. What satellite television and the television rights going for, zillions of dollars has done is it's brought in so much money into the game that you can actually just play Ranji Trophy, which is our first class cricket, not even IPL, not even for India. And if you just play Ranji Trophy, you will earn a decent living. You will earn a good living in as much as you would probably earn more than what you would if you had a corporate job with no qualification. Just cricket being a qualification. A lot of, earlier on, there used to be a lot of corporate cricket. And so you didn't have to be holding a degree, university degree. If you played adequate cricket, decent cricket, you got a job, which you had till you retired at the age of 60 or thereabouts. But what this has done recently is that you have this, the fact that there's so much money that has come in, and it's been spread around. You have to say that the money has been spread around all the different states in India, and therefore each state therefore has a talent pool which is the envy of another state. So yes, I think cricket being a career option has been the biggest change.
And I'll just ask one final question. I'm mindful of time, and I'll combine two questions into that. One is, do you think cricket will dominate India's psyche, or do you think there's scope for other sports to come up? Kabaddi, for example, hockey has been there for ages, but it really hasn't got the limelight that it deserves. And secondly, how do you see cricket, the potential of cricket in really strengthening the diplomatic ties between India and Australia? Your thoughts?
Well, I think cricket has captured the imagination of the Indian public ever since, for ages. And the recent wins will certainly only, bolster that. It will only make it that much stronger. The other sports like, hockey, badminton, tennis, they're doing very well as well. Kabaddi, for example, which we just talked about. And Kabaddi is a fantastic way to connect with Australia, because Australia has this game called, the tag. So clearly, I think something like that is somewhere where India, Australia can come together. But I think it will take a little while. I think what we need is, for when the Olympics, and I do hope the Olympics happen, if our badminton players win, if our hockey players win, then again, the country will be enthused about these sports as well. I personally, I'm a huge badminton fan. And if you give me a choice between watching a game of cricket and watching a game of badminton, I promise you I'll watch badminton more than cricket. But I think you need winners. And the moment you start getting winners in sports, whether it's a team sport or an individual sport, there's a lot of gravitation of youngsters towards that sport. Then there's a role model in front of you. There's somebody who you can emulate. Yes, I think if that happens, then clearly I think other sports will also come to it. What was your second question?
Just the potential you see in cricket in further strengthening the diplomatic ties between India and Australia.
Oh, absolutely. I think, when the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi ji, came to Australia in 2014, immediately after he had taken over as Prime Minister a few months earlier, the first time, he had invited Kapil Dev, VVS Lakshman, myself, and then from the Australian side, there was Steve Waugh, Glenn McGrath, over for a dinner at the MCG. And the Australian Prime Minister then, Mr. Tony Abbott, also was there. And so we had a huge get-together over there. There was a lot of cricketing talking. So yes, I think cricket certainly is one way that the countries can come together. Way back in 1947, even before I was born, I'm sure you weren't born then, but even before I was born, one of India's greatest cricketers, A.S. Dulip Singh Ji, after whom the Dulip Trophy is named. He was India's High Commissioner to Australia in 1927. So, and he was known mainly as a cricketer. So, yes, I think there's certainly a huge scope for diplomatic relations to get cricket along with it.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I'll hand it over to Jim.
Thanks, Preeti. And I'm the cricketing empire, and time is up. It's getting on to the end of our webinar session. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists, starting with Senator Colbeck, just share with me 3 words of what this webinar means for you. So over to you, Senator Colbeck, your 3 words.
You're on mute.
You need to unmute. Yeah. Yep.
Oldest trap in the book. Look, it is relationships, and Sunil mentioned that. So relationships, and building the strength of relationships, I think, is the foundation of that. It's about, and it's connections. You know, the commonality of the sport. Sunil said it's a common language, and that's right. And you build connections through those common languages, things that bring people together, and build relationships. So, you know, it's pretty simple in that sense. It's those things that we enjoy, bring us pleasure, and bring us together. And so the relationships and the things that bring us together, I think, are a really important part of what we do. And sport, being one of those common languages, is a great way to do that.
Thanks so much for that. Ambassador Anil, your 3 words. You have to unmute. Just
Sorry
yeah,
about that. Jim, very quickly, my 3 words, my takeaways: fascinating, informative, and insightful.
Very good. Thank you. Nick Hockley, your 3 words.
Thanks, Jim. Mine would be friendship, rivalry, and respect.
Mm-hmm. Brenton Humphreys, your 3 words.
It's getting more difficult down the chain, isn't it, to think of 3 new ones?
Oh, it doesn't matter. Can be the same. Can be the same.
No, I'd echo what previous speakers have just mentioned. For me, opportunity, significant opportunity, particularly if we think creatively. A lot of what has been mentioned before around thinking creatively across that broader sports marketing, for sure. Authenticity, that friendship, relationship, absolutely comes true. And longevity. I think that our relationship, has been a long one, and will always be a long one. But just that longevity of our relationship and the strategies that underpin our connections between sporting clubs and whatnot and community, I think they're the key elements that come through for me.
Thank you very much. And Dharmendra Patel, your three words as our sponsor too.
Yeah, I think I agree with the relationship, opportunity, and I would say it's a new beginning, which will, foster a good relationship, and the international students will more encourage to participate in the sporting activities, which will be the cultural exchange and, like a long-term relationship between 2 countries.
Thank you. Sunil Gavaskar, your 3 words.
Sporting futures together.
Excellent. I'd now like to ask Preeti to share with me her 3 words, and then you do the vote of thanks. Over to you.
Thank you, Jim. I think for me, it's friendship, opportunity, and partnership. So I think everyone summed it up. On behalf of Australia-India Business Council, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all our eminent speakers for taking the time to join us at the launch of AIBC's National Sports Chapter. Minister Richard Colbeck, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa, Nick Hockley, Brenton Humphreys, and Indian cricket legend, Mr. Sunil Gavaskar. Thank you so much for your valuable time and company and sharing your insights with us today. Events like this are not possible without the support of our sponsors. So thank you, Dharmendra Patel and Aussies Group, for your partnership. We look forward to continuing it in the future. Many, many thanks, Jim, for your wonderful moderation as always, and for your vision and leadership at AIBC. It is an absolute pleasure to work alongside you and all the wonderful colleagues at AIBC. Last but not the least, my sincere thanks to the wonderful team who work tirelessly behind the scenes to make these events possible. Secretariats, Wendy Farrell and Karishma Serene, and Vishal, our IT guru, this go-to man. To all the members, guests, and friends who are with us, who've joined us from far and wide, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to seeing you at our next event, which you can see on the screens right now. On that note, thank you so much once again for your time and for your company. Until next time, have a great time and enjoy. Bye.
Thanks very much for that, Preeti. And can I again say to our audiences in Australia and India, good evening now, and namaste, namaskaram. Look forward to seeing you again in a future webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.